The rifle sat in perfect stillness against the concrete barrier, its matte black finish drinking in the desert sun like a predator's shadow. Colonel Marcus Thorne had seen thousands of weapons in his 30-year career, but something about this particular M24 sniper weapon system made his blood run cold. The serial number had been filed clean, the stock bore no unit markings, and most unsettling of all, the scope glass held no reflection, as if it had been professionally treated to eliminate any trace that might betray its wielder's position. "Where did you get that rifle?" The question hung in the air like cordite smoke, but the figure behind the weapon didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Captain Raven Blackthorne, call sign Ghost, had been polishing the bolt assembly with the methodical precision of someone who had performed this ritual 1,000 times before. Her hands moved with surgical steadiness, each motion deliberate, economical. The other Marines in forward operating base Minerva had learned to give her a wide berth during these moments, when she retreated into that place where memories lived and died in equal measure. 3 hours earlier, a Taliban sniper had taken out 2 Marines from an impossible angle, a shot that military analysts would later describe as geometrically implausible. The enemy marksman had vanished like morning mist, leaving behind only brass casings and the kind of fear that seeps into a unit's bones. Standard protocol called for air support, artillery bombardment, maybe a full company sweep of the surrounding mountains. But Ghost had simply picked up her rifle, checked the wind, and walked toward the perimeter. Now she sat in the shadow of a Humvee, working the bolt with the fluid grace of a concert pianist. The weapon seemed to purr under her touch, responding to her ministrations like a living thing. Each component gleamed with an almost supernatural cleanliness, as if she could polish away not just carbon residue and dust, but the weight of every shot she'd ever fired. Colonel Thorne approached slowly, his boots crunching on gravel. He'd commanded Marines in Fallujah, Helmand, the Hindu Kush, places where legends were born and heroes died nameless. But watching Ghost work her rifle was like witnessing something primordial, a communion between warrior and weapon that transcended mere military training. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and rust, but Ghost remained untouched by the light, a figure carved from shadow and silence. She looked up then, meeting his gaze with eyes the color of winter storms. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken stories. The mystery of where she'd acquired that particular rifle would haunt Thorne for years to come. The mountain range stretched endlessly toward Pakistan, its peaks crowned with snow that had never known summer's touch. From the observation post, the landscape looked deceptively peaceful, rolling hills carpeted in scrub brush, ancient goat paths threading between rocky outcroppings, valleys that had witnessed the passage of empires. But Ghost knew better. Somewhere in those mountains, a Taliban sniper was preparing for his next shot. "Victor 2-7, this is Overwatch. I have eyes on the target area," Ghost's voice crackled through the radio, calm as morning coffee. She'd positioned herself on a ridgeline 800 meters from the fob, her rifle resting on a bipod, scope trained on the valley where the enemy marksman had last been seen. Lieutenant Jake Reeves, fresh from Quantico with his uniform still holding creases, peered through binoculars from the command bunker. "Overwatch, Victor 2-7. Negative contact on thermal imaging. How copy?" Ghost adjusted her scope's elevation, compensating for the mountain air's thin density. "Solid copy, 2-7. Patience is the sniper's first virtue." Colonel Thorne watched from the Tactical Operations Center, his coffee growing cold as he studied the drone feed on multiple screens. Ghost appeared as a barely visible silhouette against the mountainside, so perfectly camouflaged that even knowing her exact position, he had to squint to make out her form. The woman had a gift for invisibility that went beyond standard ghillie suit techniques. She seemed to become one with the terrain itself. "Sir, with respect, shouldn't we call in an airstrike?" Reeves suggested, lowering his binoculars. "Grid coordinates are solid, and we've got a Reaper on station with Hellfires ready to go." Thorne shook his head slowly. That sniper took out Corporal Martinez and Private Chen with surgical precision from 1,500 meters. You don't hunt a surgeon with a sledgehammer, son. You hunt him with someone better. The radio crackled again. Movement, southeast ridge, approximately 2,000 meters, Ghost reported, her voice betraying no emotion. Single individual carrying what appears to be a Dragunov SVD. Through the drone's camera, they watched as a figure emerged from the rocks, moving with the confidence of someone who believed himself invisible. The enemy sniper settled into a position overlooking the main supply route, where convoy trucks would be rolling through within the hour. Ghost's breathing slowed, entering that meditative state that separated true marksmen from mere shooters. The wind had dropped to almost nothing, the mountain air still as death itself. Through her scope, the enemy sniper appeared crisp and clear, adjusting his own rifle's position with practiced efficiency. "Range 2,100 meters, she whispered into her throat mic. "Wind negligible, barometric pressure steady." "Overwatch, you are cleared to engage," came the reply from the TOC. Ghost's finger found the trigger, caressing it with the gentleness of a mother's touch. The shot, when it came, sounded like thunder rolling down from heaven itself. The Barrett M24's report echoed off the mountainsides, multiplying into a symphony of controlled violence that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. But by the time the sound reached the forward operating base, Ghost was already cycling the bolt, ejecting the spent brass casing that tumbled end over end toward the valley floor below. Through the drone's high-definition camera, they watched the enemy sniper crumple like a marionette with severed strings. One moment he was a threat, the next he was simply another casualty in a war that had already claimed too many. The Dragunov rifle fell from nerveless fingers, clattering against the rocks as gravity claimed what skill could no longer hold. "Threat neutralized," Ghost reported, her voice carrying across the radio frequencies with the same calm professionalism she might use to order coffee. "Target down, no movement observed." Lieutenant Reeves lowered his binoculars, staring at the distant ridgeline where Ghost maintained her position. "Holy shit," he whispered, then quickly glanced at Colonel Thorne. "Sorry, sir, I meant." "I know what you meant, Lieutenant." Thorne's own binoculars remained trained on Ghost's position, though even with magnification she was little more than a shadow among shadows. That was a 2,100-meter shot in mountain conditions with minimal wind compensation. Do you know what the record is for longest confirmed sniper kill? "No, sir." 2,430 meters, set by a Canadian Forces sniper in Iraq. What we just witnessed. Thorne paused, watching as Ghost began the methodical process of breaking down her position. What we just witnessed was a woman operating at the absolute pinnacle of her craft. The radio crackled once more. "Victor 27 Overwatch, returning to base, ETA 15 minutes. As Ghost began her descent from the mountainside, moving with the sure-footed grace of someone born to high places, Thorne found himself wondering about the rifle she carried. Standard issue M24s didn't possess the kind of precision he just witnessed. That weapon had been modified, tuned, and refined by someone who understood the science of long-range shooting at a level that bordered on the supernatural. The mountain wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of cordite and the promise of more rain. Somewhere in the valley below, the enemy sniper lay still, another name that would never be known, another story that would never be told. But Ghost would remember. She always remembered. The mess hall at Forward Operating Base Minerva buzzed with the usual evening chatter, Marines discussing patrol routes, complaining about the food, sharing photos from home on battered smartphones. But tonight, the conversation kept drifting back to the shot. 2,100 meters, one round, one kill. The kind of precision that separated legend from reality. Ghost sat alone at a corner table, methodically working her way through an MRE that could charitably be described as edible. She changed out of her camouflage utilities into standard desert digitals, but somehow she still managed to blend into the background, unnoticed despite being the subject of half the whispered conversations in the room. "Mind if I sit?" Lieutenant Reeves approached with his tray, gesturing toward the empty chair across from her. She looked up, those winter storm eyes assessing him with the same intensity she'd used to study the enemy sniper. After a moment, she nodded toward the chair. Reeves settled himself carefully, acutely aware that he was in the presence of someone who had just accomplished something that would be talked about in Marine Corps circles for years to come. "Hell of a shot today," he offered. "It was adequate," Ghost replied, returning her attention to the questionable pasta in her MRE pouch. "Adequate?" Reeves couldn't hide his incredulity. "Ma'am, with respect, that was the kind of shot they'll be teaching at sniper school for the next decade." A ghost of a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Distance shooting is just mathematics, Lieutenant. Angle, wind speed, barometric pressure, temperature differential, Coriolis effect, variables in an equation. Is that all it is to you, mathematics?" Ghost set down her plastic spoon, meeting his gaze directly. "Every shot I take removes a threat from the battlefield. Every threat I remove means Marines go home to their families instead of in flag-draped boxes. The mathematics are just how I make sure the equation balances correctly." From across the mess hall, Colonel Thorne watched the exchange with growing interest. He'd served with snipers before, had commanded entire platoons of them. But Ghost was different. There was something in her approach to the craft that transcended mere technical proficiency. She didn't just shoot targets, she solved problems. And the rifle she carried, that mysterious M24 with its filed serial numbers and professionally treated optics, seemed to be an extension of her will-made manifest. "Captain Blackthorne," he called out, approaching their table. Both Marines started to rise, but he waved them back down. "As you were. Mind if an old colonel joins you for coffee?" Ghost gestured to an empty chair. "Of course, sir." Thorne settled his considerable frame into the plastic chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. "Outstanding work today, Captain. That shot will probably save a dozen lives when our next convoy rolls through that valley." "Just doing my job, sir." "About that rifle of yours," Thorne began carefully. "I've been in this business for 3 decades, and I've never seen an M24 perform with that kind of precision. Where exactly did you acquire it?" The mess hall seemed to quiet around them, as if every Marine within earshot was holding their breath. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, pregnant with implications that none of them fully understood. Ghost's fingers drummed once against the table, a barely perceptible gesture that somehow conveyed volumes about the weight of unspoken history. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the measured cadence of someone choosing each word with surgical precision. "That rifle came to me through unconventional channels, sir," she said, meeting Colonel Thorne's gaze without flinching. "Sometimes the Corps standard procurement procedures don't account for specialized requirements." Lieutenant Reeves sensed undercurrents in the conversation that his academy training hadn't prepared him for. The way Ghost's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when discussing the weapon, the careful neutrality of her tone, it spoke of histories that existed in the shadows between official reports and classified briefings. "Unconventional," Thorne repeated, tasting the word like aged whiskey. "In my experience, Captain, the most effective tools often come from unconventional sources, particularly when those tools find their way into the hands of someone who knows how to use them properly." Ghost nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement that somehow managed to convey both gratitude and warning. "The rifle and I understand each other, sir. That's all that matters." Outside, the mountain wind rattled the mess hall's corrugated metal walls, a reminder that beyond the relative safety of the forward operating base lay thousands of square miles of hostile territory. Somewhere in those mountains, other enemy snipers might be preparing their own weapons, plotting their own shots. The war continued its ancient rhythm, action and reaction, hunter and hunted, with precision instruments serving as the punctuation marks in a deadly conversation. Thorne pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against concrete. "Well then, Captain, I suggest you and that rifle of yours get some rest. Intelligence suggests we may have more uninvited guests in the morning." As the colonel walked away, Reeves leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Shoot," Ghost replied, then smiled at her own choice of words. "How did you know? Where to position yourself, I mean. That sniper could have been anywhere in 100 square miles of mountains." Ghost's expression grew distant, as if she were looking through the mess hall walls toward those peaks that scraped the belly of the sky. "Snipers are creatures of habit, Lieutenant. We choose positions based on sight lines, escape routes, and psychological factors. That ridge offered the enemy shooter everything he needed: elevation, concealment, and multiple egress paths back toward the Pakistani border." "But how did you know he'd be there specifically?" "Because," Ghost said, rising from the table and shouldering her rifle case, "it's where I would have gone." She walked toward the exit, leaving Reeves to contemplate the implications of that statement. Outside, the mountain darkness was absolute, broken only by the distant glow of guard towers and the occasional sweep of searchlights across the perimeter. Ghost disappeared into that darkness like smoke dispersing in a breeze, carrying her secrets and her rifle toward whatever dreams snipers allowed themselves in this corner of hell. The pre-dawn hours at Forward Operating Base Minerva belonged to the sentries and the sleepless. Ghost moved through the darkness with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to navigate by starlight and instinct, her rifle case slung across her shoulder like a familiar burden. She'd given up on sleep hours ago, too many memories crowding behind her eyelids, too many faces that refused to fade with the coming of morning. The armory was empty at this hour, just the way she preferred it. Ghost spread a clean cloth across one of the maintenance tables and began the ritual that had become as essential to her as breathing. The M24 emerged from its case like a serpent from its lair, each component gleaming with the kind of care that bordered on reverence. She'd acquired the rifle 3 years ago in circumstances that would never appear in any official report. A CIA contractor named Viktor Petrov had been selling modified weapons to the highest bidder, supplying both American forces and Taliban fighters with equal enthusiasm. When Ghost had tracked him to a safe house in Kabul, she'd expected to find a simple arms dealer. Instead, she'd discovered an artist. Petrov's workshop had been a temple to precision engineering. Barrels that had been hand-lapped to tolerances measured in fractions of thousandths of an inch. Triggers adjusted to break clean at exactly 2.5 pounds. Scopes mounted with mathematical precision and sealed against the kind of environmental extremes that would destroy lesser optics. "You understand what you're looking at," Petrov had said in his accented English, watching as Ghost examined the rifle that would become her signature weapon. "Most soldiers see only the tool. You see the art." The arms dealer hadn't survived their encounter. His body was found 3 days later in an alley behind the safe house, apparently the victim of a robbery gone wrong. But his masterpiece had found its way into the hands of someone who could appreciate its deadly perfection. Now, in the pre-dawn quiet of the armory, Ghost continued the maintenance ritual that kept both rifle and operator at peak performance. Each component was cleaned, inspected, and reassembled with the kind of attention to detail that would have impressed a Swiss watchmaker. The bolt slid home with a whisper-soft click, the safety engaged with mechanical precision. "Captain Blackthorne." Ghost looked up to find Corporal Maria Santos standing in the doorway, her expression uncertain. Santos was a vehicle mechanic from East Low's Angels, barely 22 years old, with grease permanently embedded under her fingernails and a laugh that could be heard 3 bunkers away. "What can I do for you, Corporal?" "Sorry to bother you, ma'am, but I couldn't sleep and I saw the lights on." Santos stepped into the armory, her eyes drawn to the rifle on the table. Is it true what they're saying about the shot you made yesterday? Ghost resumed her cleaning, working a cloth along the rifle's stock. What are they saying? That you took out that sniper from over a mile away. One shot, clean kill. Santos's voice carried a mixture of awe and disbelief. My cousin was a Marine Scout sniper, did 2 tours in Iraq. He always said anything over 800 meters was more luck than skill. Your cousin was half right, Ghost replied, checking the scope's alignment. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. The answer seemed to satisfy Santos, who nodded thoughtfully. Mind if I ask where you learned to shoot like that? For a moment, Ghost's hands stilled on the rifle. The question touched on memories that she kept locked away, stories that existed in the spaces between official histories and classified operations. Dawn was still hours away when the first mortar rounds began falling on forward operating base Minerva. The initial explosions came without warning, shattering the pre-dawn quiet with the kind of violence that transforms peaceful moments into chaos within the span of a heartbeat. Ghost was still in the armory when the base's alarm system began its urgent wailing, the sound cutting through the mountain air like a banshee's scream. Incoming, incoming, all personnel to hardened positions. The announcement crackled through speakers mounted throughout the compound as Marines rushed from their bunkers toward defensive positions. Ghost slung her rifle and moved with practiced efficiency toward the command post, her boots splashing through puddles formed by the previous night's rain. More mortars impacted around the perimeter, their explosions walking closer to critical infrastructure with each salvo. Colonel Thorne was already coordinating the response when Ghost arrived at the Tactical Operations Center. Banks of monitors showed feeds from security cameras and thermal imaging systems, painting a picture of coordinated assault from multiple directions. Sit rep, Ghost called out, taking her position at the sniper coordination station. 12+ hostiles in the eastern mountains, firing 82mm mortars, reported Lieutenant Reeves, his earlier nervousness replaced by the focused intensity of combat. They've got our range dialed in, sir, adjusting fire toward the fuel depot. Through the drone feed, Ghost could see muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers among the rocks. The enemy had chosen their positions well, elevated firing points with clear sight lines to the base, positioned far enough apart to avoid being suppressed by a single artillery strike. Counterbattery radar has firing solutions, announced the fire control officer. Ready to call for fire, sir. Negative, Thorne replied, studying the tactical display. Those positions are too close to the village of Calayi now. Civilian casualties are unacceptable. He turned to Ghost. Captain, can you reach those positions? Ghost was already calculating angles and distances, her mind processing ballistic data with computer-like efficiency. Eastern Ridge, approximately 1,800 to 2,200 meters. Doable, but I'll need to get closer. How close? 1,200 meters should do it. There's a rocky outcropping northwest of the base that would give me overlapping fields of fire on their positions. Another salvo of mortars impacted near the motor pool, sending up geysers of dirt and debris. One round landed close enough to the communications bunker to shower the area with concrete fragments, serving as a stark reminder that the enemy was systematically targeting the base's critical infrastructure. Do it, Thorne ordered. Take Corporal Santos for security and observation. Santos, who had been helping to coordinate evacuation procedures, looked up in surprise. Sir, you wanted to see how real snipers work, Ghost said, shouldering her rifle case. Consider this a field education. They moved out through a sally port in the base's northern perimeter, using a drainage ditch for concealment as they worked their way toward the elevated position Ghost had identified. The mortar fire continued behind them, a steady percussion that seemed to shake the very mountains themselves. "Stay low and follow my movements exactly," Ghost instructed as they began climbing toward their destination. "The enemy has spotters watching for counter-sniper teams." Santos nodded, her earlier mechanical confidence replaced by the hyper-awareness that comes with being outside the wire in hostile territory. The outcropping Ghost had selected offered commanding views of the eastern mountains, while providing natural concealment from enemy observation. She settled into a firing position with practiced ease, adjusting her rifle's bipod legs while Santos scanned the surrounding terrain with binoculars. "Contact, 11 o'clock, approximately 2,000 meters," Santos reported, her voice tight with adrenaline. "Muzzle flash from behind those large boulders." Ghost adjusted her scope, the enemy position resolving into crystal clarity through the powerful optics. 3 men in traditional Afghan dress were servicing a mortar tube, their movements efficient despite the improvised nature of their firing position. The wind had picked up with the approaching sunrise, adding another variable to an already complex firing solution. Ghost made minute adjustments to her scope's windage, compensating for the air currents that would affect her bullet's trajectory over more than a mile of mountain terrain. Her breathing slowed, heart rate dropping as she entered the meditative state that separated successful shots from near misses. Through the scope, she could see one of the enemy fighters preparing another mortar round, his face clearly visible despite the tremendous distance. The M24 spoke once, its report rolling across the mountains like distant thunder. The radio in Colonel Thorne's Tactical Operations Center crackled with Ghost's calm voice. "Target 1 neutralized. Adjusting fire to Target 2. Through the drone's camera, they watched as the enemy mortar team scattered like startled birds, their carefully planned assault beginning to unravel under the precision fire of a single sniper operating from an impossible distance. The dead man lay crumpled beside his mortar tube, a reminder that in this ancient land, death could arrive on silent wings from directions unguessed. But the battle was far from over. As Ghost acquired her second target, muzzle flashes began appearing from new positions across the mountainside. The enemy had brought more than mortars to this fight. They had brought patience, planning, and the kind of tactical sophistication that spoke of training beyond what village fighters typically possessed. The second shot from Ghost's position echoed across the valley like a pronouncement from some vengeful deity. Through her scope, she watched the enemy fighter spin and fall, his AK-47 clattering against the rocks as gravity claimed what skill could no longer protect. Beside her, Corporal Santos worked the radio with growing confidence, her mechanical precision translating surprisingly well to battlefield communications. "Overwatch to Victor 2-7, Target 2 neutralized," Santos reported, her voice steady despite the fact that she was calling in sniper fire for the first time in her career. "Observing movement from multiple positions across the eastern ridge." The response came immediately from Colonel Thorne. "Roger, Overwatch. Be advised, we're picking up radio intercepts in Pashto. Sounds like they're coordinating a withdrawal." Ghost cycled her bolt, ejecting the spent brass casing that tumbled down the mountainside. "They're learning," she murmured, more to herself than to Santos. "Professional fighters would have scattered after the first shot. These guys are trying to maintain unit cohesion." Through her scope, she could see the remaining mortar teams beginning to displace from their positions, moving with the kind of tactical discipline that suggested military training rather than simple insurgent enthusiasm. One group was breaking down their weapon with practiced efficiency while maintaining security. Another was already beginning to bound back toward the Pakistani border. "Third target, bearing 090, range 2150, Ghost called out, tracking a figure who appeared to be directing the withdrawal. The man wore the distinctive pakal hat of a Taliban commander, and his movements suggested someone accustomed to giving orders rather than taking them. The wind had shifted with the rising sun, adding a crosswind component that would push her bullet several inches off target at this range. Ghost made the necessary adjustments, her muscle memory compensating for variables that would have confused less experienced shooters. Mathematics and physics merged with intuition, born of countless hours behind the scope. Her finger found the trigger's sweet spot, that precise point where the slightest additional pressure would release the firing pin. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to nothing more than the crosshairs centered on her target and the rhythm of her own controlled breathing. The shot broke clean, the rifle's recoil absorbed by her body's perfect positioning. 2.5 seconds later, the time required for her bullet to traverse more than a mile of mountain air, the Taliban commander crumpled to the ground, his plans for organized withdrawal dying with him. "Jesus Christ," Santos whispered, watching through binoculars as the remaining fighters abandoned their weapons and fled in panic. "Ma'am, that guy was over 2,000 meters away." 2,147 meters, to be precise, Ghost replied, already scanning for additional targets. "The mathematics don't change just because the distance increases." But the remaining enemy fighters had learned the lesson their commander's death had written in blood across the mountainside. They abandoned their positions with the desperate haste of men who suddenly understood they were being hunted by something beyond their ability to fight or comprehend. Within minutes, the mortar fire that had been systematically dismantling forward operating base Minerva ceased entirely. The radio crackled with Colonel Thorne's voice. "Outstanding work, Overwatch. Threat eliminated, all enemy personnel withdrawing toward the border. RTB when ready." Ghost began the methodical process of breaking down her position, cleaning the rifle's bore and securing her equipment with the same careful attention she applied to every aspect of her craft. Santos watched in fascination as the woman who had just eliminated 3 enemy fighters from impossible distances returned to the quiet professionalism that seemed to define her every action. "Ma'am," Santos asked as they prepared to return to base. "Yes. My cousin always said that snipers were born, not made, that you either had the gift or you didn't." She paused, looking back toward the mountains where 3 men had died. "Is that true?" Ghost shouldered her rifle case, the familiar weight settling across her back like an old friend. "Everyone's born with gifts, Corporal. The question is whether you're willing to pay the price to develop them." As they began their descent toward the base, the morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful and terrible in their ancient indifference to the small human dramas played out among their peaks. The after-action review took place in Forward Operating Base Minerva's briefing room, a concrete box decorated with maps, tactical charts, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were suffering from radiation poisoning. Colonel Thorne sat at the head of a scarred wooden table, flanked by his staff officers and the Marines who had participated in the morning's engagement. Ghost occupied a chair near the back of the room, her rifle case propped against the wall beside her like a faithful guardian. She'd changed back into clean utilities, but somehow the scent of cordite and mountain air still seemed to cling to her like an invisible signature. Lieutenant Reeves sat across from her, still processing what he'd witnessed through the drone cameras. "Let's start with the tactical picture," Colonel Thorne began, activating a wall-mounted display that showed satellite imagery of the engagement area. "Intelligence indicates this was a probing attack, designed to test our defensive capabilities and response times. The enemy employed approximately 15 fighters in total, equipped with 3 82mm mortar tubes and small arms." Major Patricia Walsh, the base's intelligence officer, stood to address the room. "Intercepted communications suggest this was a Taliban unit operating under the direct command of Mullah Abdul Razak, a mid-level commander with connections to Pakistani intelligence services. The tactical sophistication displayed during the initial phases of the attack indicates professional military training." which makes Captain Blackthorn's counter-sniper response all the more significant, Thorne continued, his gaze finding Ghost in the back of the room. 3 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, executed under combat conditions with precision that effectively broke the enemy's unit cohesion and forced their withdrawal. Murmurs rippled through the assembled Marines, a mixture of professional appreciation and the kind of awe reserved for witnessing something that pushed the boundaries of what they'd thought possible. Ghost remained impassive, her expression revealing nothing of whatever thoughts occupied her mind. "Captain, would you walk us through your tactical decision-making process?" Thorne requested. Ghost rose and moved to the front of the room, her presence somehow commanding despite her relatively small stature. The enemy had chosen their positions based on standard mortar employment doctrine, elevated firing points with clear lines of sight to critical infrastructure, positioned far enough from civilian areas to complicate our counter-battery options. She used a laser pointer to highlight positions on the satellite imagery. Their mistake was clustering their teams within a relatively small area to maintain command and control. This created a situation where a single sniper operating from an elevated position could achieve overlapping fields of fire on multiple targets. "What about the ranges involved?" asked Captain Hendricks, the base's fire support officer. "Those were extremely long shots, even by sniper standards." "Distance is simply another variable in the ballistic equation," Ghost replied. "Bullet drop, wind deflection, air density, Coriolis effect. They're all measurable phenomena that can be calculated and compensated for. The M24 platform, properly configured, is capable of first-round hits at ranges that most people consider impossible." "Properly configured," Thorne repeated, his tone carefully neutral. "Tell us about your rifle, Captain." The room grew quiet, everyone sensing the significance of the question. Ghost returned to her chair, her hand unconsciously moving toward the rifle case. "Sir, the weapon has been modified to meet specific operational requirements. Enhanced barrel trigger system tuned to my specifications. Optics selected for maximum clarity and light transmission." "Where were these modifications performed?" "Various sources, sir. Some work was done by civilian gunsmiths, some by military armorers with specialized training." Ghost's answer was technically accurate while revealing virtually nothing about the rifle's true origin. Lieutenant Reeves raised his hand. "Ma'am, Corporal Santos mentioned that you seem to know where the enemy would position themselves. How?" Ghost considered the question for a long moment. "Snipers think alike, Lieutenant. We're drawn to the same types of terrain, the same tactical advantages. In Afghanistan, there are only so many positions that offer the combination of elevation, concealment, and escape routes that professional fighters require." "Professional fighters," Major Walsh interjected. "You think these were more than simple Taliban recruits?" "Their tactical discipline during the withdrawal phase suggests advanced training. Village fighters would have scattered immediately after the first casualty. These men maintained unit integrity until their commander was eliminated, then executed a coordinated withdrawal that minimized further casualties." Colonel Thorne leaned back in his chair, processing the implications of Ghost's assessment, which suggests we're dealing with a more sophisticated threat than standard insurgent activity. "Yes, sir. Someone with access to trained personnel and quality equipment." Outside the briefing room, the late afternoon sun slanted through bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across maps that showed a country divided by ancient tribal boundaries and modern military necessity. Ghost's performance that morning had saved lives and prevented significant damage to critical infrastructure, but it had also raised questions that extended far beyond simple marksmanship. As the meeting concluded and Marines began filing out, Colonel Thorne approached Ghost. "Captain, a word." They waited until the room was empty before Thorne closed the door, and activated the white noise generator that would prevent electronic eavesdropping. "That rifle of yours," he began without preamble, "I need to know if it's going to become a problem." Ghost met his gaze directly. "Sir, I've been in this business long enough to recognize when someone's carrying hardware that didn't come through normal channels. What I need to know is whether that's going to compromise operational security or put my Marines at risk." The question hung between them like smoke from a distant fire. Ghost understood that Colonel Thorne was offering her a chance to come clean about the rifle's origins, or at least to provide him with enough plausible deniability to protect both of them if questions arose from higher headquarters. "The weapon poses no security risk, sir," she said finally. "It serves one purpose: eliminating threats to Marine Corps personnel. Everything else is irrelevant." Thorne studied her for a long moment, weighing the risks of pressing further against the value of maintaining operational capability. Ghost had just demonstrated the kind of precision that could change the tactical balance in their area of operations. Pushing too hard might result in losing that advantage. "Very well, Captain, but understand that if that rifle ever becomes a liability, we'll revisit this conversation." "Understood, sir." As Ghost left the briefing room with her mysterious weapon, Thorne wondered if he just made a decision that would come back to haunt him. But in a war where American lives hung in the balance, sometimes you had to trust the weapons that kept your people alive, regardless of where they came from. The mountains around Forward Operating Base Minerva held their secrets close, ancient peaks that had witnessed the passage of Alexander's armies, British expeditionary forces, Soviet mechanized divisions, and now American Marines. Ghost understood this landscape in a way that went beyond simple tactical appreciation. She felt its rhythms, its moods, the way it could shelter friends and enemies with equal indifference. 3 weeks had passed since the mortar attack, 3 weeks of routine patrols and reconnaissance missions that had yielded nothing more threatening than suspicious packages that turned out to be smugglers' caches and tire tracks that led nowhere. But Ghost knew the quiet was deceptive. The enemy was still out there, watching, planning, adapting.